Can you hear me okay if I'm that far back?
Yep, we can hear you fine. So, hear you just fine. So, here we go. And welcome to a special episode of the Spoiler Room. Have the honor today of being joined by Patrick Reed Johnson, the director of one of the films we are talking about on our special 25th anniversary series of episodes, Spaced Invaders. Patrick, I want to thank you for joining us. How are you doing today, sir?
Doing really well. Glad to be here. It was a little bit of a last-minute panic. I had some transportation issues. My 1975 Ford Pinto is currently on life support at the local garage, and so I'm sharing a car with my girlfriend, and we were racing another event she needed to be at when suddenly I went, oh, wait, 6 o'clock! I've got to be on my podcast with Mark! So.
Well, I'm glad you didn't hit anything with a Pinto, because we know how that could go.
Pinto, it wasn't even that. We were in her car, thank God. Yeah,
oh.
To be a mushroom cloud in flames. Skeletonized version of me.
So you've done many things, not only direct, but worked in special effects for, I would say, most of your career. But you had a chance to direct your first feature, which involved both directing and special effects, which was Spaced Invaders. Now, that was based off of a small budget picture you had planned called Martians, correct?
Well, here's what happened. I had started out in the film industry as a model maker in the visual effects end of things, back when everything was analog and motion control. And a young man whose name will be familiar to most highfalutin geeks now, named John Knoll, and I became buddies in those days, working for people like Mark Stetson and Greg Jean and the great sort of model-making geniuses of the time. And we were in the same model shop together, and we just became pals and became friends over time, worked on a lot of jobs together. And at a certain point, John had been dreaming of working at ILM, and I had kind of been dreaming of the same thing, but I was really I wanted to write and direct movies, and I'd already sold a couple of screenplays, and I'd directed some second unit stuff, and I'd done a lot of visual effects work. And John finally got his dream job and went up to be an effects guy up at ILM, and I continued with my sort of model making, screenwriting dual career. And at a certain point, though, I was about 8 years into that when I was thinking, I haven't really gotten what I set out to achieve out here. And I remember another friend of mine, Stephanie Yang, who was an editor, a sound editor for Doug Trumbull, actually. Right around the same time, John Knoll said, you know what you should do, Patrick? You should write something that only guys like you and I can do for a certain amount of money. Because we know special effects. And I said, yeah. And then like on the same day he said that on the phone, I got a card in the mail, just a greeting card for no special purpose other than just as an encouragement from my friend Stephanie. And it was a Far Side card, and all I remember was the punchline. I don't remember what the joke was. I remember the setup. The punchline was focus. Focus! Okay? And she was basically saying what I kind of already knew, which that I was sort of meandering around creating lots of big, epic motion pictures on paper. I wrote something called Star Sailor, which is going to be Douglas Trumbull's next film.
Nice.
I was noodling around with the beginnings of the idea for Dragonheart at the time, but I was writing these sort of epic entertainments, and I hadn't even directed my first film yet. So Stephanie and John, each in their way, were basically saying to me, look, pare down, go back to your inspiration, find something that you can do well for no money, focus, get acute, find something. And I remember at one time, when I was growing up, one of my favorite films that my father and mother and I used to watch when I was a little kid was The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming.
Oh, okay, sure. Mm-hmm.
Terrific movie. If anyone doesn't know the story real quickly, it's about a stranded Soviet submarine crew on a little island off the East Coast that they've run aground spying on America, and it's Alan Arkin is sent out, he's one of the Russian sailors, is sent out with a crew of idiots and with machine guns to secure a motorboat, or a powder motorboat, as they're calling it, to pull this submarine off the shoals and get it the hell out of there before the Americans discover they're there. Well, unfortunately, this is the height of the Cold War. The people of the village and the island are given to panic at the idea that the Russians are invading, because as soon as word gets out that Russians are heading for town, through the sort of devil's radio of a telephone tag of the Russians are here, there are Russian guns, the Russians are killing people, there's thousands dead, basically it turns into this complete fiasco for both sides. And I won't give away the ending, but it's a terrific little ending for the movie. And it was made for, nothing, with a bunch of great actors, and it just stuck with me all these years. But I thought, well, you can't really remake it, because by the time we're talking about 1989, 1990, and there, I mean, it's the end of the Cold War, the walls are coming down, everything's kind of coming unglued for good movie writing, anyway. And for Russians being bad guys at that time. And by the way, I love Russians. Many Russians have been there. Russia's not a bad place. There's just certain elements of the government, like ours, that I don't agree with. But so I thought, well, wait a minute. Why science fiction's my favorite thing in the universe, plus times comedy, times, why not replace the Russians with Martians? And then it occurred to me, all right, 50 years ago to the day almost that it was 49 years ago when we were writing this thing, was the War of the Worlds broadcast, which scared the pants off an entire nation. I thought, who'd be stupid enough to fall for it now? What if Martians heard it? And they thought they'd missed out. What if the wackiest ship in the Martian Navy overheard that broadcast? But it was a rebroadcast 50 years later. Some nostalgic guy at a radio station in the middle of nothing, Illinois, just playing it just to kind of cheer up his depressed farm town on Halloween night. And it changes everything, because they overhear this broadcast and like, what? We missed the invasion? Off Earth looking for this big invasion. And of course they're 3 feet tall with watermelon heads and antennae and horrible guns that don't work. And they can't even get arrested, let alone take over the world. They're mistaken for trick-or-treaters and shoved in the back of a country squire station wagon. So I wrote this thing with my friend Scott Alexander, and it took us, I think we wrote the first draft in a month. Every night,
Sure.
Everybody up to dawn, and we got this thing done. And the person I was living with at the time, I had a roommate named Jason Clark, who produces now, like the Stuart Little films, and just did the Cosmos series, So he's he got a lot out of this, because he was working for a guy named Luigi Cingolani, a terrific guy, amazing producer of sort of low budget, the kind of films you would see. They had a place called Smart Egg Releasing, and they would produce films that you would see at like AFM.
Oh, sure.
With a poster and a videotape, and they'd sell it to foreign markets and everything. And they'd done pretty well for themselves. They had some cash. And Jason was developing for them and producing for them, and he said, "What's the script I hear you guys laughing about all the time?" I said, "Oh, it's this little thing. You might want to read it." And he read it, loved it so much, he took it into his boss. He calls me he comes home that night, and over our usual dinner of macaroni and cheese, he's like, "Dude, my boss wants to meet you." And I'm like, "Luigi Cingolani? Is it safe? Will I end up with a horse head in my bed?" I'm making fun of him, but I knew he really liked the guy, and he thought the guy had, some balls and was willing to take on first-time directors. Because he could get them cheap, and we'd do great work to impress, and it was a perfect marriage. So we met, and I brought in my whole little dog and pony show, Scott Alexander and myself, and we had Kenny Myers, the amazing makeup effects guy, had done a maquette of The Martian as we saw it at the time, which was still 3 feet tall with watermelon head and antenna, but the bodies were like pencil stick figure. Never to achieve. Today you could do it, but so. And I had built study models of the Martian patrol ship.
Oh, sure.
The Enforcer drone and all these. We had all these things that we could kind of set on the desk, and I acted out the whole movie, and did sound effects and blew things up, and in my mind and in front. And it was. He kind of sat back. He goes, "I love it. It's fantastic. Okay, I tell you what. How much you need?" I said, "I need $1.75 million." No, I said, "I need $2 million to do this right." And we budgeted it to the best of our ability, and we thought we were correct. And by the way, before Luigi had picked this up, we'd gone all over town with it, and it had been uniformly laughed at. I mean, the final place we went before Luigi was Disney, and Jeffrey Katzenberg himself said, "Look, this is great, but I'll do it, but it's going to be $13 million, and you're gonna have to have like Vern meets the Martians.
Sure.
And it's going to have to be Jim Varney, as your lead." And we wanted DeForest Kelley to play the old guy. But this time, it looked like there was never going to be another Star Trek movie, so we thought, okay, they'll do it, right? And we actually got into some talks with him about doing it right before they did another Star Trek movie.
Sure.
Available, which was actually the best thing that could have happened ultimately, because Royal Dano was so good in the movie. So he said, I'll give you 1.75 million and not a penny more. And I said, but we need two. He goes, Patrick, look at you. Who's going to give you anything? You're nobody. I give you $1.75 million. Who else is going to do that? And I'm like, he's got a point. So we shook hands, and then we went and made this little movie for about $2 million. But I mean, what we achieved for $2 million, I mean, look, it's not Terminator, you know, but it's got some really fun stuff. And I called my friend John Knoll, and I said, John, I wrote this thing. And meanwhile, John has ascended to doing The Abyss.
Sure.
So by day, he's working on The Abyss, doing the water tentacle, designing how that's going to get done, thinking that up, okay, and animating it and doing all that. And then at night, as soon as he clocks up out of ILM, he's racing across the Oakland Bridge to a little warehouse in Oakland where a bunch of other ILM guys have raced over, and they're all working all night long on these motion control rigs made out of literally anything they could find, right? They were churning out shots for our film at a budget of like, I don't know, $100 a shot or $200 a shot, because he was doing it as my best friend, and I was best man at his wedding, and he was best man at mine, and we were sort of this amazing conglomeration. Scott Alexander was working on it, and we had Tony Tremblay, this great production designer, and basically my philosophy was, all right, I've been given the keys to the kingdom. I get to direct my first movie, right?
Sure.
So I'm going to get the best people I could possibly get, not by trying to find people who are all in these great positions and asking them to take a huge pay cut and work on my goofy little movie. They're not sure who I am. I instead looked around for people who'd mostly never done the job they were about to do, but had done the job just beneath it for years and were great at it and not yet been given that opportunity. And so I hired, I mean, that's not, I mean, you know, we had plenty of people who had done their jobs. Like, you know, our costume designer, Sonia Hayes, had Sonia Milkovich. She does all the Fast and Furious films, right?
Sure.
Okay. At the time, she'd been a wardrobe supervisor, a costume assistant. She'd never really done any major films. You know, Ariana Richards had never done anything. Just a couple of little bit parts, but she was phenomenal. You know, Tony Tremblay had never really been a production designer before. He was mostly an art director, but he was stepped right into the role, and of course they all took it on with relish. You know, who else was? We had a couple others like that. I mean, David Russo, the composer, he had scored other little films, but he'd never done a full orchestral score that I'm aware of before. And he did a good job on this. Who else did we elevate? Oh, I don't know if you know. Let's see. Greg Aronowitz. Have you ever heard of Greg Aronowitz?
No, I'm not familiar with the name.
All those reproduction things for the Star Wars stuff, all the reproduction.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
And his company's way beyond that now. He's a producer, director, whatever, a makeup effects guy. He was just this young, upstart, new guy. He and oh God, I'm losing my. Do you have our credits in front of you? There's
yeah, I do have the.
Who else? I mean, we've got. There were just so many people who kind of got a start.
Sure.
Greg Johnson, and who else?
So you had James Carter for your cinematography.
He's done a number of things and was terrific. Sure. You know, who was the? There was someone else I wanted to mention. I'll think of it. But we just had tons and tons and tons of people working for us who had just been given this opportunity to start their sort of dream job on this, and so they worked their hearts out. You know, you couldn't hold them back. If you threw them a challenge, they'd just take it and run, and they'd come back with something far beyond your expectation. So every time I'd say, just, you know, we need a prop of this little communicator thing, and it's what I want to have is these little dealy bobs that come out sort of like, you know, party favors, you know, and these guys went off and made this little, you know, pneumatic. Which is a prop that on another movie might have taken a huge budget, but they just caught. I remember I said, I need a V8 engine that a guy can lift out of the front of a truck, that Vern can lift out, and they're like, we don't have a budget to build some props. And Greg Aronowitz ran off, he got some foam core and some Tupperware and some, you know, and a hot melt glue gun and some spray paint. 2 days later, he goes, look, a V8, you know. With this thing that looks for all the, it's got cables and it's leaking oil and it was fantastic. It was kind of like nobody knew. It's like like the Roadrunner when he doesn't know the laws of gravity, so he can't fall. You know, nobody knew what they couldn't do, so they just ended up doing it. No, they'd never hit a limit before.
Sure.
So I wasn't going to give them any limits. They didn't have any. You know, it was really fun. Really fun.
And wow, that's a great story. I was wondering, that led me to wonder how much creative control you had, or was it more of a? It sounds like it was more of a collaborative effort among all of you on the design and that for when you were working on it, or did you have did you come up? Nah, that's not going to work, or you know.
No, that's interesting. Like John Criswell was John Criswell and Greg Johnson were the heads of the makeup effects,
Right.
And Steve Lang was the painter for the Martian heads and everything. I think he sculpted on them as well, and we had a lot of really talented people that were sort of at the beginnings of their career. Everybody was throwing in on the design work. I mean, I did a lot of sketching of what I wanted things to basically be like to start out with, and then, as I said, Kenny Myers helped us refine the look of the Martian head, and then Steve Lang got involved, John Criswell. John Criswell runs the shop over at Henson Creature Shop now,
Right.
the fabrication shop, and the mechanicals, and so there was this real fervor to do something, that shouldn't be able to be done for that amount of money. Well,
Sure.
because everybody thought, from me on down, if I do something that should not be able to be done for this amount of money, people are going to pay attention.
Right.
So everybody put way more into it than they were getting paid for, which was a miracle at every turn. Look, did it all work perfectly? No. And some of the charm of the movie is that it's mostly goofy. It's kind of willfully cheesy, somebody once said, and one run review called it willfully cheesy, and I thought, I can live with that. It's okay. I mean, it never set out to be anything other than wildly entertaining, but in a completely sort of Monty Python-esque way. I mean, I'd much rather, if for the rest of my life, I could make movies that used effects and visuals more like, Terry Gilliam, and less like, say, certain large pixel-related films that are full of pixels and no life. I'd rubber over pixels any day of the week.
Oh, I've always been a big advocate of practical effects because I think they age better too.
They absolutely do. You look at, I'm looking now. Look at Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, honestly, some of the stuff that was done with rubber versus some of the stuff that was done early, especially early on with pixels.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm a fan of both. I mean, I'm not one of these either-or guys. And John Knoll, my friend, and J.J. Abrams obviously have elected with the new Star Wars films, and Kathy Kennedy. They all got together and they said, "Now, come on, let's bring it back to the tactile. Let's bring it back." I mean, I remember in the first Star Wars films, the most romantic. By romantic, I mean epically romantic. I don't mean love. I mean the most romantic images in that film for me, as I remember the first 28 or 30 times I saw it in the theater, were those two robots out on sand dunes in the middle of nothing. There was no pixels, no matte paintings, just two robots on sand under the evening sky. That, to me, typified the beauty of how science fiction could be wrought through cinema, through real cinema, tactile, analog, beautifully lensed cinema. And it also let me know the rest of the film that was literally made out of things that you could find lying around your garage became sort of my touchstone, my model, my mantra, what I would always hoped for, because that's how I started. I was making movies out of things I could find lying around my garage, and that's truly what Star Wars was. From the costumes on down to the miniatures, everything was a kludge job of greebles and nirnies and things that found objects repurposed. That's why it struck such a chord, I think, in young people's imaginations, not because it was all that far away, but because it was actually incredibly close to home. Because all the way down to in Empire with the ice cream maker.
Oh yeah.
Bespin. I mean, these things meant something to us because they were our world repurposed, the way kids play in their living room or their basement or their backyard. And so we did the same thing, or tried to, with Spaced Invaders in its own little way. I mean, it didn't become the hit that Star Wars became, but for its money, it made 1,000% of its money back. That's too bad.
That's not too bad. No, and I think it look. I'll say right now the practical effects in there look great. I just watched it again the other night, and I was watching this going, wow, this could go toe to toe with the other larger budget practical effects movies back
Well,
then.
the effects guys did an amazing job. The art department, Tony Tremblay's group, and the various construction people we had, they were crazy. They took on the job of taking asteroid patrol ship X-59YPQ, which is actually X-59YPQ is the license plate of my car at the time. That's how we came up with that. There's no secret code or anything. But to take that object that we built and have them build it full size on set, so that it could be crashed in the barn like that, and if inside and out full size, all one bit, and then take it out on location and put it up on its ass, for launch mode. And I remember the first time I drove out, because that was one of the first days of shooting. I drove out to the location, and from 10 miles away, I could see this thing standing tall out where they China Beach, out in the valley, way the hell out there in north of, I don't know how it was, west of Valencia. I can't remember where it is, out in the West Valley of above San Fernando Valley or Simi Valley, Thousand Oaks, out that way somewhere.
Sure.
I just remember coming over this rise and seeing my giant Martian patrol ship gleaming in the morning light. And I thought, how? How many movies do that? We built a miniature. We could have just done it all with a miniature, matte paintings and all that, but to have it full size like that, that's why, it's no Millennium Falcon, but so excited that there's a 360-degree interior exterior Millennium Falcon from now on in Star Wars. Okay, I'm in. Whatever else you do, I'm in.
Yeah, it's an impressive ship. All the practical effects in there are actually impressive. I could definitely see the Star Wars influence, though, in a lot of your design and a lot of the designs, namely like the fleet. Was it a little bit of an ode to the calamari capital ships that you had there?
Not really, and I'll tell you why. What happened, I'll tell you how that design came about. The Cactus ship, the Atomic Imperial Space Navy battlecruiser, was, I was racking my brain. Tony and I had been doing drawings. Scott and I were doing drawings. I was kludging together things from battleship parts and trying out different things, as you do. As you do. And one day I was over, I think, for some reason I was at Raleigh Studios, and they had this old, in Hollywood, and they have this cantina, you probably have been there, this little Mexican cantina where you could eat your lunch, and I was seated at a table, and I was hunched over at this table looking at my script and drawing some storyboards or something, and I look over to my left, and in the corner of this room that I'm sitting in is three churro cactus, or cacti, in a pot. Because I'm like this, I'm not seeing them sticking up, I'm seeing them sideways, and it was like this moment, and it's like, Moonwatcher looking at the bone, and I'm staring at it, and before I know it, and before the rest of the people trying to have their lunch know it, I'm standing up next to this thing going, just trying to imagine this going by, and I'm like, and all the bristles could be guns, turrets. And I call up, Tony, and I start sketching this thing, and I call up John Nolan, and I say, I got it. So I sent him photos of this churro cactus, and that's what they modeled it on.
That's great. The fleet of churro cactuses.
Churro cacti. But it seemed appropriate. I don't know. It seemed appropriate to these idiots that had gotten their entire culture through our TV and radio broadcasts.
That's what I was going to ask Ness. That's the impression I got with their culture, because you see a lot of influences in their costuming and the way they talk. Namely, whose decision was it to have Blasny talk like Jack Nicholson?
The original thought was, the movie actually used to, at first it opened, and we scripted it this way, and then we had to cut it for cost reasons. And it started with Carl Sagan sitting there with a bottle at JPL, blearily watching these monitors for the Viking landers, right? And one of them's going to go dead any minute, the other one's still kind of putzing along. And he's just, there's like a janitor behind him going, Mr. Sagan, you should probably go home. It's been 10 years or 20, whatever. 20 years, I don't think there's any life up there. And he's like, and as he puts his head down and the janitor turns away, you see an ice cream cone land right in front of frame, just blot, right? And all of a sudden, as he's sitting there packing up his stuff, behind him, there's like these arms come in, and like a hatch opens, and one of these little drones, like Scout in a can, come flying in, and they like sweep up the ice cream cone and go out of frame, and you tilt up and you see that the whole Viking lander is in the middle of this big diorama with a cyclorama photograph around it in a shopping mall on Mars under the domed surfaces that are painted to look like the surface of Mars. And it was some little Martian Boy Scout who dropped his ice cream cone, like, you idiot! Don't. So, and then we were going to get a little tour of Mars City, and get this kind of sense that everything there was being sucked out of the radio and TV frequencies from Earth, that they didn't have any nascent technological abilities of their own at all, and that everything they built was some kind of, well, it kind of should look like this. It did in, 12 o'clock high, the bombers looked like this. They're building their spaceships to look like, P-47s and B-17s, So, but, that was obviously way too much for our, technical prowess and budget at the time. So that all went out the window. But we thought, you know what, people will just infer. They'll just get it. And mostly they did. Some people were like, what? And other people really, said, what, I bet. It's like it caused arguments. That's what you want. When you're making an important film, you want people to argue about it around coffee tables and, and have, intellectual discussions about the depth of your film.
Yeah, I just loved Blasny. When he spoke in Jack Nicholson voice, when I first saw this when I was 15, I loved it because I'm a big Jack Nicholson fan. There was the hype that you had just heard he was going to be, he was going to be the Joker. Well, he was the Joker at that time, yeah, because when this came out, he was just the Joker, so I fell in love with him as the Joker, and here you have the alien talking like him.
Well, it's funny because we almost got sued into the Stone Age for it. Ultimately, it was more of a threat than anything, I think by his lawyers. I don't think he cared one whit. He probably didn't knew. Probably still doesn't now. If you're listening, no offense. No, the whole idea was the Martians chose personalities based on TV programs and radio shows as well. That's why each of the Martians actually is a certain movie star. Blasny is Jack Nicholson. Dr. Ziploc is basically Dr. Strangelove. He's Peter Sellers in Dr. Strangelove. Captain Dipto is, who is he meant to be? Well, it's kind of like, I don't know, Keenan Wynn.
Yeah.
Basically Keenan Wynn. And then Lieutenant Giggywig is
Patton?
Cary Grant.
Oh, Cary Grant, okay.
And so he's, and we went very specifically in that direction. And I'm the Enforcer drone, so there's no one famous there. A quick vacuuming, a little air freshener, and I will complete my duties with perfection. With a lot of pitch transposing and echo. And
oh, sure. I love the design of the Enforcer drone. Definitely kind of had a little bit of a probe droid feel to him.
Definitely meant to, and here again I thought, well, it's contemporary. They could have seen Empire Strikes Back. They're Enforcer drones based on the probe droid.
And he had a...
You might as well be the latest version of badass possible.
He had a lot of moving parts. One of the other robot that I really liked, though, the only other robot in there really is the Scout robot, which reminded, and he reminded me of the droids from Batteries Not Included. Actually, the little droids.
Which is a terrific film. I really love that film, and I can say, I don't know if I was consciously influenced by that because I certainly didn't remember thinking of that when I did it, but I can say that. Certainly, probably unconsciously, because I found those designs to be really, really sweet. I think I was as much what I wanted to do in essence was the robotic version of Marvin the Martian at that point, but I wanted him to be simpler than that. I wanted him to be like, just almost like a little wind-up toy, just an automatic thing and a tool. And if anything, he was our R2-D2.
Sure.
It was actually trying to do our version of R2-D2 in a way. And I think that worked out pretty well. That was another real interesting. That entire character is all sleight of hand because we couldn't animate him. We didn't have time or any. One of the things I kind of regret is that we never did any stop motion animation in the movie at all, because I love stop motion. It just, no one on our team was really proficient at it, and it was a time suck. But luckily, the makeup effects team also created Scout McCann, and they made him do a lot of things. I mean, he had a lot of motion, he had a lot of arm motion and head ability, and but the idea of him sort of collapsing off screen with a sound effect and then using one of those little radio controlled roller balls as his collapsed form to go, we actually had scenes where he'd roll around corners and do stuff, but it took a lot to do that. We ended up just chucking the damn thing across lawns.
Now, they always warn, and I have to ask, they always warn, especially for newer directors, you never work with pets or kids. And you end up working with
kids, robots, Martians, spaceships, old people, cars, trucks, guns, and it was 90% of it was shot indoors in a stage about 100 feet by 50 feet with about a 13-foot ceiling.
Really? Wow.
Much outdoor material, especially the night stuff. All the stuff of her running up and down roads and then going up and down roads at night, all on stage, with forced perspective cornfield backgrounds with little city lights made out of Christmas lights, and we had something called the Cornomatic. That was our greatest achievement. The Cornomatic was literally, the Flintstones background, but done real. It was two giant sonotube, concrete former tubes, motorized with a big chicken wire conveyor belt built around them, stuffed with corn stalks. Turn that thing on, and we just corn stalks going by, and then we had the car, the sheriff's vehicle. Sure. Sitting in front of that, being bounced around by the grips, and the camera was being bounced and moved a little bit closer, a little farther away, and there were dust guns shooting little puffs of dirt and smoke through. And every now and then we literally went so far as to build like a foam rubber telephone pole, right? That we would sometimes just throw that thing in a C-stand, and then like a stop sign on the telephone pole, and with all that and the sound effects and them pretending, it looks like. Mostly looks like they're driving.
But it does look like it's driving, and I think the effect fits the rest of the overall visuals of the film, though. So when you do see that,
even if you kind of begin to tell at some point, we did that also with houses. That's when it became the real Flintstone effect. When they're driving in the station wagon, we're in the back of the station wagon, and you see the house lights going by. It's just like the Flintstones. We just got a conveyor belt. There's lights inside now, and instead of chicken wire, it's just black scenic paper with cutouts and gels. Just going.
That's awesome.
In fact, there's one shot where the Martians are running away. The donut of destruction has come unglued, and they're running. Prepare to die, your son. Prepare to die, your son. I'm gonna make sure they carve that on your tombstone. Well, so there's 4 of these guys running, but really they're running in place because, and the Cornomatic's going by behind them. And later in that shot, they actually kind of drift out of frame and like bump into one of the girders that's holding up the building, and because they couldn't see. Those heads, the eyes were down here on them. Okay, so there was no place for them to see in the heads that had mechanical control in them, because all the servos and everything were all where their eyes would be. So there was a mirror, a 45-degree angle mirror in the mouth that they could look down at like this. And so as long as their mouth was open, they could kind of see like this foggy something out there. It became so pathetic that they just like, tell us where to go. So not only, as they're acting, I'm going, okay, left, no, my left, no, oh, no, wait, and they're crashing into things and knocking over light stands, and it was crazy.
I was wondering how you did those masks, because they were impressive, but you could tell it was down low, so where the faces were, so that...
Really an engineering, I mean, the entire makeup effects team, Greg Johnson and John Criswell primarily, were just, they were geniuses, and they've proven themselves to be further on, after this. This was maybe their first big break, but that's how they got noticed, but they were so smart. It was just, again, it doesn't work perfectly, but I'll tell you what, for the amount of money they had and the amount of time they had on this low-budgeted film, it's terrific. Some people love the flapping gum look, but the point is, the hardest part was, and I know, when you're doing that kind of stuff, I remember working later on the Dinosaurs TV show for Jim Henson, Brian Henson, my friend, and he taught me a valuable lesson that I kind of wish we'd been able to do on our film. The original sync with people talking. Oh, there's fire engine's coming. The original sync with the actual actors inside speaking their lines with the puppeteers moving with them was quite good. The problem, of course, was you couldn't use the sound because you could hear the servos, and
Right.
these, for the most part, weren't really voice actors. In fact, the only one whose voice is the actual person inside is Kevin Thompson, who plays Blasny.
Oh, okay.
It's really his Jack Nicholson impersonation. The other guys, there were a number of other voice artists who came in and did the other Martians for us, and they were, Bruce Lanoil is one. I'm going to blank on several of the others now, but Bruce Lanoil did Corporal Pez, one of my favorite characters. He was really fun. And then, and by the way, and the people inside, the suits. I mean, you had Kevin Thompson inside Blasny. You had I'm going to forget names.
Tony Cox was.
Tony Cox was inside Corporal Pez, and then Dr. Ziplock was. Oh gosh, he's going to hit me. It's all this. I'm being distracted by all this fire and stuff outside.
It says Debbie Lee Carrington.
Debbie Carrington,
Yes.
who the reason I should never have forgotten that, besides the fact that she was amazing in that part, is that she was the one. I had headphones on, so I could hear all of them talking on a private radio channel, and so I would direct them. They would say stuff back to me. Sometimes they'd just try to crack me up because I was the only one who could hear them. I remember one time Luigi and I, because of a paperwork error, Luigi got the impression one day that about 65% of the way through, or 75% of the way through the shooting, I'd only actually done about 10% of the movie. Some paperwork thing, right? So he comes in and he's freaked out and he's yelling and screaming, and he said, "Let's take this outside." So we go outside and he and I are buttonholing each other, and I'm saying, "How dare you accuse me of not doing my job? I've got more footage than this movie could ever use in the time we had it." And he's going, "No, I have a good idea on the paper. You didn't even shoot 10% of the movie yet." And it was because the script supervisor had made the choice that any shot that was going to later have an effect in it would not be credited as a finished shot.
Oh.
So Keeper, since like 75% of the movie or 60% of the movie had an effect to be later put into it, I had literally if you just went through the books, you would go, "My God, he only shot 10% of the movie. We're screwed," right? So he had legitimate concerns that were unfounded, but he didn't know that. So right. He's screaming at me. I'm screaming at him, but I'm trying to keep a straight face because chief amongst the pirates in my ears, yelling encouragement and swear words and all kinds of curses and things I should do. I've got Debbie Carrington yelling, "Kick him in the balls! Get him!" And I'm sitting there trying to have a serious, meltdown, with my producer, with her yelling these like sailor-like encouragements for me to brawl with him. It was quite an epic thing to have 5 actors in Martian suits screaming at you in your headpiece.
Well, they moved around well, though. I have to admit that they really
had to do and try to keep them. Those heads were heavy too. I mean, there's no discounting the fact that these giant heads. That was a lot, and the costumes, which were beautiful, were also kind of heavy because they had a lot of accoutrement. There were a lot of fittings and belts and heavy material and big boots. It was hot. They're on stage. Instead of being outside in the cold where it would have been perfect. They were on, their stage lights, trying to give us depth of field in a tiny stage, with lots of hot lights. Jim Carter did an amazing job, though. I remember one time he got real mad at me because I was trying to have him light this moonlight coming backlit on this country road, and he's like, and I'm like, "Come on, Jim, we gotta shoot." He's like, "I'm trying to light inside that freaking wall. I gotta put a moon in a wall. I can't get the light back enough, far enough for the shadow," and I go and spread like a, I mean, he was right, but he was great. Did such a great job. I mean, the movie looks really good, especially for the budget.
It does. That's why when you mentioned the budget, that surprised me because it does look like it was made for a lot more money than what it was.
And that hurt us when a bunch of reviewers said, this is a Disney movie, it's a Touchstone movie. They had $15-16 million to make it. Yeah, where's the movie? And it's like, if I'd had $15-16 million, I'd have made 5 movies. Or I'd made, a sequel to Star Wars. I would have done something, So we kind of were hurt by our, some of our success.
Sure.
But at the same time, the coolest thing that happened was when it was finished, or just basically done. We hadn't done the final mix, and not all the effects were quite in yet. We started, the producer started shopping it around, and he got a lot of the same thing. He was like, "Man, you must have spent a lot of this. I don't know how you're going to make your money back." And he's like, "It's only $2 million. You're going to make your money from people who come in from the cold, break." So, but that people just weren't biting. And then one day, my manager, Melinda Jason, had the really, really, really smart idea of calling. She basically set up one screening, and she then picked up the phone and she called the president of Warner Brothers, all right, and Bruce Berman at the time. And she said, "Bruce, I'm confused. Why aren't you having anyone come to the screening? I mean, I thought you would come, but I may understand if you're busy, but you don't have anyone coming to my client's screening?" And he's like, "What are you talking about? What screening?" And she goes, of this thing it's called Martians at the time. He goes, "Martians? Everybody's talking. You got to. I can't believe you're not sending somebody over." He's like, "Of course we're sending somebody over. Why wouldn't we send somebody? I mean, I look just a click, Yeah. So next thing she knows, she gets a call from somebody junior saying, there's a screening I'm supposed to So she then gets on the phone, and she had said to Bruce, Jeffrey Katzenberg's sending somebody, Tom Pollock's sending somebody, the presidents of Disney and Universal, respectively, and so she then calls them. Katzenberg, she goes, "Jeffrey, you're confusing me. Like, Bruce has got somebody coming to the screening. You're not. You're gonna let Bruce Berman beat you out of this?" Like, Jeffrey's like, "What are you talking about?" And so she explained, "Oh, I'll send somebody." Okay, never mind. Click. You send somebody. Same thing with Tom Pollock. Same thing with all the major studios, right? She calls everybody, and they all show up. 15 minutes after that screening is over, they're calling my agent and my manager and saying, "Yeah, okay, we see it. Okay, so what do you But they're not racing to it. Mm-hmm. They're kind of they see something there, but they don't know what they see yet. They just know that they don't want to get beat out in case it might be a little cult film that goes big, but they don't quite get it yet. 20 minutes later, we get a phone call from Amblin.
Oh.
And they're like, "So we heard there was a screening." And my manager's like, "Yes," and they were like, "And so you don't want to show it to us? You don't want to show it to Amblin, really?" And of course, I hadn't even dreamed. I mean, in my wildest dreams, and I'd met Steven years and years and years before. It's in my movie 52577. There was a scene where on the set of Close Encounters, and he'd been very encouraging, and it was a dream of mine to work with him someday. But I didn't think in a million years that this film would ever be seen by him unless he was flipping through channels late one night, years later, and found it, So, of course, the agents and managers say, "Oh, sure, we'll show," because all we had was the work print. That was all, so we sent it right over. And as I'm told, I think this has been verified, but as I'm told, Steven and his son Max watched it together in the Amblin Theater, and Steven liked it so much, he basically told Kathy Kennedy about it, and I got a call from Kathy Kennedy's office to please come over and have a meeting, and they called Jeffrey Katzenberg at Disney and Steven called him and said, "You should buy this, and fix it up a little bit, pretty it up, put a touchdown title on it, and get it out there. It's a really fun movie, and we'd love to be involved in maybe a Amblin supervised Disney deal kind of thing, And I get this call and mind blown, right? And suddenly we're off with this little movie that was meant to maybe be a video title.
Sure.
If you will. Now, then so Jeffrey calls and I have a meeting with him, and then he says, "What do you want? What do you want to do? How do you want to finish this?" And I said, "What do we have to do? Let's put it out there." And they're like, "No. We'll do some stuff with it. We'll fix it up, and you can do some reshoots, and you can get." I'm getting a little hinky. I'm just like, "Oh, wait a minute. It's doing pretty." I mean, Steven liked it. Why don't we just put it? I mean, it was good enough for Steven, I think. But there was a Disney process that they wanted to put us through.
Right.
It took almost a year, but it went out, and I'll tell you that it ended up, made 1,000% of its money back.
I was gonna say it. it did do fairly well considering its budget was $2 million. Now that you mentioned, I'm like, wow.
Well, I'll put it this way: I was given a Disney stockholders report by a major Disney stockholder from the fiscal year that movie came out, and it was actually listed in their kind of goals for the future as Disney. We should focus more on making movies like Spaced Invaders.
I will say one thing though. I have to admit, I remember when I was when it came out, the trailer for it. I will say, I'm sorry to bring it up, but I have to ask because the trailer was completely not what the movie was.
Well, neither was the title Spaced Invaders. I mean, the original concept which we sold it on was called Martians with 3 exclamation points, and it was like, prepare to die, Earth scum was the tagline, and the poster was the Iwo Jima pose, only with these Martians planting the Martian flag on a big hill of manure in a farm field or whatever, with the rising moon behind it and the slogan up above, 50 years ago, the War of the Worlds broadcast scared the pants off an entire nation. Who'd be stupid enough to fall for it today? Right. And Martians, prepare to die, Earth scum. And it was a whole campaign. In fact, Luigi Cingolani, in order to help sort of pre-sell the movie in foreign markets, he and my guys and my artists and his artists, and even my father did one of the original paintings, created this campaign that there were all these one-page ads and full-page ads and variety of that poster and different character paintings and things like that. And there were these press kits that had 3D posters in them drawn by like some major some major comic artist, and I can't remember. It's not Jim Steranko, but it was someone that good. It was, well, maybe not that good, but almost that good. And with 3D glasses and punch-out, fold-together paper models of the Enforcer drone and the spaceship. It was like he went full tilt on this to show what a kind of fun, cheesy Warner Brothers cartoon-like thing this was going to be. And and that's what Steven said to me when we talked about it after he'd seen it. That was the charm of it for him, was that we were of course willfully trying to send up science fiction movies, alien movies, Martian movies, the War of the Worlds, Warner Brothers cartoons, and give homages. He said his favorite shot. He goes, "I love that shot you did with the little police car going along under the road, under the stars." He goes, "Don't think I didn't recognize that." I said, "I wanted you to." You never see it.
And in fact, Blasny has one of those famous Warner Brothers lines in it. When I say "whoa," I mean whoa. I remember because I watched it, I'm like, wow. But I just remember that trailer though, and they had overdubbed it with Louie and some odd dialogue. And
there is not. I don't think. Maybe when I say "whoa," I mean "whoa" is in there. Yeah. That might be the only line of actual dialogue from the movie that's in the trailer.
Yeah.
It's got the William Tell overture. And toga, and it's all basically frat boy dialogue. It's Animal House dialogue done in our Martian voices, and they're not even the actual Martian voices either. They're just other voiceover artists they got doing these horrible lines, and people were like, "This trailer sucks." I think it cost us more business than it gained us. But you never know. I mean, Disney's in the business of putting movies in theaters, and they know how to sell movies. Especially now. I mean, I think what they're doing now, they've become. I think they're the. Weirdly enough, there was a period of time when I thought that they were not the death of movies, but I was worried that they were going to create a sort of sausage factory of movies that weren't worth releasing, and now they're really making a lot of movies that are worth releasing.
Yeah.
The whole Marvel universe is amazing, truly amazing. It's an industry unto itself. Star Wars is now what I always hoped it would be, which is essentially a new genre. It's a backlot. It's the new Western, where, over time, if it continues to succeed, I think the model might be, look, bring us your Star Wars project. If we like the script, you can play in our sandbox.
Yeah.
Why not? I mean, what if, if Jim Cameron wants to make a Star Wars movie, great. But I'm looking for, what if really interesting indie directors decide to do some kind of amazing drama set in that backlot, or a film noir piece, or a murder mystery, or a romance, or whatever, a buddy comedy. Why not? I mean, do it all. You could just let it be a new. It's like a parallel universe in a galaxy far, far away, a long time ago. I'm okay with that.
I am too, and it's Disney. I always mention to someone that if Disney wants something to be successful, they will make it. It'll be successful. I mean,
That's true. I mean, that's really true. I just thought it was ironic that they originally passed on it, saying only if it's going to be Ernest Meets the Martians, for $13 million, and then instead we spent 2, and they make 20, and everything. It worked out. It was great for me. I mean, obviously it launched. It was not in any way, shape, or form what I thought I would do as my first film. I mean, I wanted to do, epic science fiction. I had a thing called Star Sailor, which was captains courageous on solar sailing vessels, and but not like Treasure Planet. I mean, serious sci-fi.
Right.
With sort of post-NASA Renaissance, the spacecraft that Elon Musk is going to be building, the spacecraft that Virgin is building, and 30 years hence,
sure.
Where's that going to go once once we've left the solar system, but just barely. We're not trekking around in warp speed quite yet. We're just touching the hem of that, in that script. But if someone had told me when I started out that my first feature would be, a bunch of little green men running around with malfunctioning, cosmoblasters, I would have said, nah, no, that won't happen. But it kind of worked out perfectly. I'm really happy with it.
I love the film. One of my friends, Tom Berdinsky, he makes a lot of indie horror films. He mentioned, actually, he's big into the special effects. He did Giant Rubber Monster film and that. He does all these great miniature effects. But he mentioned that it was an underrated comedy, and I have to agree that Spaced Invaders, I think, is one that deserves more attention. And I will say the promotion, I think, did kind of miss, I don't think the trailer did do it justice, because when I got in there, the film was actually a lot better than the trailer led on. I got out of the film going, wow, that wasn't anything like the trailer, but I'm glad it wasn't anything like this.
Funny because the trailer sent away the audience I was looking for. What I was looking for was an audience that got the joke.
Mm-hmm.
The audience they were attracting, there were no jokes waiting for that audience. The ones that wanted to see Animal House, or I mean, not even Animal House. It wasn't that smart. The trailer.
No.
Animal House is a really funny, sharp-witted satire on top of a bunch of boorish behavior by John Belushi and others. It's got everything. It's got something for everybody. We didn't really have something for everybody. We had something for. It's pretty sophisticated stuff. Some of the humor. I mean, some of it's a lot of movie references, a lot of historical references, a lot of in jokes, a lot of entendre. There's a lot of stuff going on there. I don't mean it's epic writing or anything, but it's funny writing. It's really clever writing, and it works. The audience that discovered it and have stuck with it and have supported it, and the reason we're even talking about it 25 years later at all. It was funny. Anyways, that audience are people that dig a little deeper and want a little more. And then the Guardians of the Galaxy audience, had they been in theaters, would have liked it. I think, one of the things that's really funny is that, as a joke, I was talking to John Knoll at one point about doing, like the 25th anniversary re-release special edition of Spaced Invaders with amped up effects, and like really grossly over-amped up, like ridiculously so that it was like, the worst moments of the special edition times 10, and little things like every now and then a little budget counter would show up and and cut away now and then to executives like hanging themselves. We're going to lose the whole studio over this. And the exterior of the box would be things like, now see it as it was always meant to be seen, at all.
At all. Nice. I would have bought it. And you got
like a 27th anniversary edition.
There you go. You had a great cast in there too. I really love the cast. Everybody. That's what I really loved about Space Invaders. Everybody seemed into it, and you had Ariana Richards, who'd go on to do Jurassic Park.
Let me tell you a funny story about that real quick. She, after the film was done, and in fact, on the very day I went over for my meeting with Kathy Kennedy, I was walking towards her office through the courtyard at Amblin, and all of a sudden, out from the door from her office comes Steven walking the other way. Now, he doesn't recognize me because why would he? I'd seen him once for 15-minute period or half-hour period on the set of Close Encounters, and we talked and hung out, and he showed me a lot of cool stuff, and it was amazing. But he didn't recognize me. Of course, I recognized him, and I thought, I can't. So he walks by me, and then I thought, no, I can't let that moment go. So I spin around, and I go, Steven. Now, imagine you're Steven Spielberg,
yeah.
and know, people are always coming at you, and you never know who's gonna what, you know. So he stops, he freezes in his tracks with his back still turned to me, and he slowly turns, like, oh God, is this it? Is this the ambush? Whatever. And I'm like, oh, it's Pat Johnson, Patrick V. Spaced Martian. And he goes, oh, okay. And he comes over and he's like, oh, I really liked your movie, blah, blah, blah. He's talking. And that's when he said, oh, I really liked the little homage shot. And you know, he was just basically really cheering me up and telling me what a nice job I'd done and how I really enjoyed it, blah, blah, blah. And then he goes, but wait, this is the thing I got to ask you. Who is that little girl? Where did you find her? I've got to work with her someday. I got to know more about her. I said, anything you want to know. She's amazing. She's so fun to work with, blah, 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 blah. Next thing I know, I'm reading Ariana Richards cast in Jurassic Park. You know? Well done, Stephen. Well played.
Nice.
And then, what a sweetheart, she goes and does a couple of those little dinosaur movies. And yeah, she gets that out of her system. I love those ones. And then she... I call her up when I'm doing Angus, and I say, listen, you don't owe me anything, but if you don't mind, if you'd come back, and she couldn't have been happier to do it. It wasn't a, well, you know, now I'm Ariana Richards. Now I'm of Jurassic Park fame. She didn't pull that at all. She was so sweet and did a great job. And she even was, at one point, she was going to play the character of Robin in the film I'm still working on, 52577, and she may yet do some little cameo for it. There's a couple of little last-minute touches we're going to put in before we get it out there.
Oh, that'd be great to see her. And then the other casting that I love, and it was one of his last films, is Royal Dano. How'd you get him?
You know, he was suggested by a casting director, and of course I knew who he was. I mean, his part, The Right Stuff, is one of my favorite films of all time, and he is so remarkable in it. In a part that has, I don't think, more than a line of dialogue, maybe. Mostly he just shows up, you know, getting out of a car with a Bible and a certificate from the Air Force, you know, with this mournful look on his face, and you're like, ugh, it's death himself, you know. But, you know, it was funny because we interviewed a lot of people. When DeForest Kelley didn't work out, I mean, Rance Howard came in, and we had a great session with him. The producers didn't want to go with him. I loved him. I thought it was great. The producers, for some reason, say, oh, it doesn't mean anything, or whatever. And I said, well, honestly, DeForest Kelley means this much. Yeah. You know? And so and Royal didn't really mean anything, except he was a great actor, as was Rance, as was DeForest. I just wanted great actors, and my head wasn't in the space of, oh, we have to somehow sell the movie. You know, I just wanted to make a good movie. You know, I thought that counted. You know. There were a lot of people up for the part that Ariana got originally, too. Lindsay Price was originally, actually, she was my choice. I actually wanted her to have the part. And in fact, you know, we kind of decided on her, and I think everybody thought she was getting it, and then the foreign money guy that was in charge of everything, who had the bucks, said, I want to go with blonde hair. I don't want someone who's from another country. I said, she's American. She's Japanese, I don't know. You know. I said, can we just make a good movie here? No, not at that time. So it was kind of sad.
Yeah. Now, drifting just a little bit away, I have to ask you, since I have you here, you were involved in one of probably my favorite films that I don't know if a lot of people are familiar with, Dead Heat.
Cut to the clip.
I got to talk about Dead Heat just because Joe Pesci, Treat Williams. I watched it.
Joe Pesci, Joe.
I'm sorry, not Joe. Joe Pesci. Joe Piscopo.
Joe Piscopo.
Piscopo. I got my Joe's crossed. Of the two Joes, yeah. Sorry, Joe Piscopo and Treat Williams.
And Darren McGavin and Vincent Price.
No.
And who else? That movie, I'll tell you what, I had so much fun doing that movie. My David Halpern and Michael Meltzer were the producers, who were friends of mine, and I was also at the time out of work, and they needed someone to come in and ride herd on visual effects. I'm credited with visual effects supervisor on that film, but the truth of the matter is it was really Steve Johnson and his team that masterminded the effects. certainly was kind of the liaison between the producers and the director and them in a kind of, keeping an eye on things way. But I didn't know nearly enough about. I mean, I knew quite a bit about it, but only enough to kind of get myself into trouble sometimes. And it was really those guys who. What I did help pull off were some of figuring out how to do certain practical effects.
Sure.
I helped design some of the sets. The resurrection chamber was based on a sketch that I'd done, and I was also the body under the table on the reservation. Bouncing around. So many great stories about that. I mean, in fact, one of the DVD, if you get the DVD, it has a director's commentary with the producers and the director on there, and they were really sweet and kind because I was way ambitious. I was so dying it. This was right before I directed anything, and I'd sold a bunch of scripts, and I was kind of trying to insert myself in every open crevice in that movie to try to fill any crack that was there with knowledge or experience or something, or just unbridled ambition. And I was a real pain in the ass, but and I thought they'd never even speak to me again, after it was over, because even though I did a lot of work for them, I was also a real pain in the ass. But on the DVD, they were so kind to me. They just brought me up again and again. Oh, remember, this was that thing that Patrick said we should do, or Patrick designed that, or oh yeah, this was that moment. And I was like, wow, how kind of them to A, remember, and B, celebrate this, because at the time they were like, okay, kid, shut up. Thank you, but shut up. Working with all of those guys. I mean, Treat Williams was amazing. He was really hardworking, funny as hell. He also flew helicopters.
Oh, okay.
Here's how I got close to Treat. At a certain point, the schedule was kind of overwhelming. It was a really ambitious project, and Mark Goldblatt, who did a great job with the material, and it's a funny script, but it was difficult to do. It was very, very difficult to pull off. And it's almost all practical. There's no digital work in there at all. So at a certain point, they were falling behind schedule, and he was in danger of losing some really critical scenes that he wanted, like the Chinese butcher shop. Yeah. So he had only gotten to in fact, it was basically on the chopping block, if you'll pardon the expression, because it was just so ambitious. And so what they did was they basically said, look, unless you turn this into a second unit scene, we're going to cut it. And he's like, you can't cut that scene. It's the pivotal scene, and plus I got Key Luke, I got, and what's his name? Not Abjad, but the big Japanese American guy. He was so bereft. He said, Patrick, would you shoot this scene second unit? You can use the Treat Williams and Joe Piscopo and all the makeup effects people and just shoot it at night on the set while we're not here and use the same equipment, everything. I said, yes, of course I'll do this. So for 3 nights. This crazy group of makeup effects people and myself and the woman who would end up being my first wife, Carolyn Baum, who was the first AD, she and I, this group, created a little unit and shot that whole scene.
Oh, wow.
And when it was over, it was cut together, and it was, the movie was put out there, and the movie, did what it did, just like Spaced Invaders. It went out and made some money, but it was, none of us are going to be in the top 100 films all the time, or there's no Criterion editions coming, but that's okay. But to my and a little bit embarrassment, but also great pleasure, just for the fact that it helped me in my career. There were reviews of this film that said, but there's this one scene. And I was like, maybe I can take these reviews and the scene itself and my script for Spaced Invader, Martians, and find a way. And by the way, I had that scene on tape with the review when I went into Luigi Cingolani's office to sell Martians. Basically,
sure.
Said, look, I can do this. So I actually owe Mark Goldblatt and David Halpern and Michael Meltzer a lot for giving me an opportunity to shine.
Sure.
I wanted to please them more than anything. At the time, I didn't ever think that one scene in a horror movie starring Treat Williams and Joe Piscopo would lead to me directing my first feature later that year.
Right.
So it was really fortunate that they gave me that opportunity. I was pretty thrilled.
That's a fun movie. It was cable fodder, that's for sure. But it played a lot. But I enjoyed it. I mean, those two, Joe and Treat, were just fun to watch.
They were, and it was an unlikely pairing at best. But I made a lot of friends in that movie. A lot of the elements that came forward and went into Spaced Invaders were forged in that crucible. Sure. And it was I'm proud of it. I was proud of working on Steve Miner's film, Warlock, you know, and that was another one that helped me get secure a number of things I needed to make my movies, you know.
On which one, Warlock, did you say?
Warlock, yeah.
Julian Sands Warlock? Really?
Yeah. Visual effects supervisor on that, too.
Right. That's another one of my favorites.
It's you know, David Toohey wrote it, and Steve directed it, and you know, it was a really ambitious film. Boy, they had a set, this sort of Boston Harbor side graveyard set for the end of the movie, and it was a forced perspective set on a huge stage, and it was beautiful, really well done.
Yeah, there's a lot of great effects on that, and the other film that had great effects on it that you wrote, Dragonheart. I love Dragonheart. Where did the idea for Dragonheart come from? I have to ask.
I love the period. I love dragons. The problem is I don't love fantasy that much. I don't like things that where magic is constantly coming in at the last moment to sort of save the day, unless it's magic that's been set up in some, in essence, believable through line, thread. You know, I like logic. I like science fiction. So I wanted to do, you know, if it makes any sense at all, a logical fantasy film with a heart, literally a heart. I had thought to myself, you know, what happens when there's only one dragon left and you're a dragon slayer? What happens then? What do you do? You know, you kill him, you're out of work. You know, but you can't let him live because he's your sworn enemy. You know, and what is the dragon thinking? You know, you know, if I play this right, I've got a job for life. So I came up with this concept, and I pitched it to Rafaela De Laurentiis, and she loved it. Patrick, I love it so much. I can't wait for you to write the script for me. And I'm like, great. When do we start? She goes, that is one of the problems. I don't have a lot of money. I don't need a lot of money. She goes, okay, I don't have any money, but what I do have is a hotel in Bora Bora. So she goes, so I'll send you and your writing partner, Scott Alexander, to Bora Bora, all expenses paid for 2 weeks, and you write me a script, and you can just charge anything for 2 weeks in Bora Bora.
Wow.
She sends us down there, and we get no work done because it's Bora Bora. I mean, come on. No, we started the work. We actually started off with a bang. We were really going. We got like 15 pages in, and I looked at what we'd written, and I went, this isn't working because it's Bora Bora. But more because I realized we weren't really up to the task of writing the film that I saw in the theater of my mind. We were writing, I was veering off, losing altitude, stalling back towards Monty Python all the time, which I love. I love Monty Python, but I couldn't see this movie playing at that level. I wanted it to be richer. I had just seen Henry V, Kenneth Branagh's version.
Right.
Just floored by the humanity of it, by a Shakespeare film that made me cry my eyes out. The Battle of Agincourt, the St. Crispin's Day speech, the whole. I said, I want Dragonheart to be that movie with a dragon and slightly less Shakespearean, you know, dialogue, but not much. I just was not that writer.
Right.
And so I came back, you know, on my shield instead of with it. I came back. Scott and I came back, you know, tanned, thin, having had incredible adventures, and you know, and eating great food, and drank a lot of whatever was, you know, fruity drinks.
Yeah.
But I didn't have a script, and I said, I'm sorry, but we still, you know, we've got a story. That we kind of worked out for the most part. At that point, we were like, okay, we got to cast our net a little wider. And again, Melinda Jason, my manager, and thankfully Charles Edward Pogue's manager, decided, hey, what about Chuck? He knows the period. He's involved with the Conan things and Cull and Cull the Conqueror. He's writing for Universal. I'm like, let's meet. So he and I met. I pitched it to him. And he said, I'm in. I said, I'll do this and this. Absolutely. And he was a big get. I mean, this is a guy. He was at top of the game. You know, Universal fair-haired boy at that moment, and you know, he was a perfect get for this. Nonetheless, the studio, I think only Rafaela believed in it enough to really push them to pay, and they did. And so Chuck and I met, and we met, and we met, and we met, and we kept working on it, and we refined the story down to essentially what it is now. And then he went off and did the first draft. He turned it into me, and I was like, damn. And we turned it in on a Friday to the studio for the weekend read. Monday morning, Rafaela calls us and says, we have a green light. We're going to go.
Wow.
And so literally a week later, we're on a plane to Spain to hang out and look at castles for a couple of weeks, and go to England to start work on the Henson Creature Shop full-size Draco head. That's another podcast.
Yes.
I've got hours of footage of all of that. Jim
Nice.
Henson did a full-size talking Draco head, voiced by Patrick Stewart. I was over there for weeks developing it with them. Their entire shop was devoted to building this thing for a test. The test went incredibly well, and there's more to tell. We really should do another talk sometime about
Sure.
footage and show you why it didn't work and why it didn't.
Mm-hmm.
What was I made a couple of critical errors.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't using Henson Creature Shop. That was the right choice. The wrong choice was how I sold the test and how I sold how ambitious the test was versus, Brian Henson had told me, just stick the head through some black cloth and let it do some routines. And I tried to make it into a little mini movie. Photograph miniatures and sets and forests and opticals, and it became, unfortunately, kind of a shitty, low-budget, scene from a shitty, low-budget dragon with a great dragon in it, So it killed me. It actually really destroyed my chances of directing the film.
Yeah.
Which was sad because Liam Neeson was going to play the knight at that point.
Oh, nice.
Elizabeth Hurley was going to be Kara. And, we had, Jerry Goldsmith was going to do the score, and I already had Sean Connery to do the voice. We had a dream cast, a dream crew, we were going to shoot it in Spain. Everything was lined up, and then I did this test and I ruined it. By being more ambitious than the test needed.
Right.
So, anyway.
Well,
win some, you lose some.
Now, you're working on another project that's been going on for a while, correct? Your what is it, 52577?
Yes. That's Boyhood took 12 years to make, and
sure.
But we had the idea first because we'll be at least 12 years by the time we're done.
But did you want to give a little just brief summary of what that one's about?
First kid that ever saw Star Wars, and he saw it 3 months before it was in theaters. And he's from Wadsworth, Illinois, population 750. How did that happen? And he saw it at ILM with John Dykstra and a guy named Herb Lightman, who was the editor of American Cinematographer magazine. How that happened, how that kid from Wadsworth, Illinois, population 750, became the kid who saw Star Wars before any other person, and then had to go back to his little town trying to tell people about the thing that was going to change his town enough, because it was going to change the world. It was going to change his town enough that he wouldn't have to leave it.
Sure.
He could just get everybody to the theater on opening night. Right? That kid was me. And how that happened is the story of the movie. So I can't tell you much more than that at this point, but I'd love to. There's a moment coming up soon that would be a great time for us to do another talk about that, and I'll bring footage. I can give you some exclusive looks, and we'll, maybe give you the history of the thing, and you'll understand why soon that doing another podcast would be a great idea.
You bet. I definitely look forward to it. I think we'll wrap it up here for this episode, but I'd definitely be happy to talk to you again. So we'll line that up. So everyone, really quick, Patrick, where can they find you, or on social network and that? Where can people find your stuff?
There's a couple of places. You can just find me at Patrick Reed Johnson, READ. There's two of me. There's the one that has anybody. The one that's empty is one I put up for another project a while back. So you can ignore that one. But the one that has 1,700 friends or something. Find me and just click on it, and we'll become friends. I'm picky, but only in terms of be cool. If you're cool, as long as you're not out to destroy the world or anything, I'm usually easy to become friends with. There's also a new page for reasons you'll find out later called Pat Johnson /fan1, or it's Pat Johnson either /fan1 or underscore or something. You'll find it.
Sure.
And it's a movie character page.
Oh, okay.
Of which there's 2 members right now. I just put it up 2 days ago. That's going to become a really fun one in terms of information about 52577.
Awesome.
And there's lots to tell about that. I will say this. A lot of people said, oh, the movie is never going to get finished. He's like Kubrick, or he can't finish. He doesn't know how to finish it. None of those things are why it's not out yet.
Sure.
None of those things. The true story of why it's not out is fascinating and interesting, and I couldn't even talk about it for a little while, but I'll be talking about it more soon.
Sure.
But the fact that let me put it this way: the time for it to come out is rapidly approaching.
Oh, I imagine. It'd be
And I'll
a.
tell you, a few people that were interested in putting it out before had said, God, you've made such a cool movie. It's too bad Star Wars is over. And this was 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Like, we released this, but there's really no, that's done. Oh, Marvel now. It's like, of course, I won't say I knew things because I didn't know anything specific.
Sure.
But anything I did know, I couldn't say a word about it at all to anyone, including my friends and relatives. Nobody, because I'd be excommunicated, I'd be destroyed, and I'd lose friends. So I had to shut the hell up and just sit back and let people say, "Oh yeah, he's never going to get it. He'll never have it," knowing that it would.
Sure.
But knowing that I was going to have to sit down and shut up and do, Luckily, I have amazing investors who've stuck with me the whole time. Who said, yeah, get it out while we're alive. That would be nice. We really have, by and large, in fact, all of them so far have just said, look, we just want it out there, and we want it. Those are the conditions.
Mm-hmm.
They're not even. A lot of them have said, I already wrote off the money. I want them to get their money back, and they will actually. They're going to. But a lot of them actually at this point have said, I just like the movie.
Sure.
I always liked it. That's why I invested. I want to see it on the big screen. Theaters everywhere.
Well, we'll look forward to it. Keep an eye out for it, folks. Look for that out soon, and I look forward to talking to you again once it is out, maybe, or close to coming out. We can talk again about that film.
Would love to.
I appreciate you coming on the show, Patrick. So
it was a pleasure. It was a lot of fun. Have fun at Stevens Point.
Oh, you bet.
Actually, we'll be out your way in last week of June, first part of July. So maybe we'll pop in.
Oh, nice.
We're going right through on the way of the Wisconsin Dells. So.
Oh, nice. That'd be great. So we're going to drop off here. I want you, if you want to hang on for a second, Patrick, I want to talk a little bit. But everyone check it out and look for our episode of the 25th anniversary of Spaced Invaders as well as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles coming soon.